Story 1. The Fog That Erased People. Leonard Hayes had been driving the Pacific Northwest routes for 18 years when he encountered the fog that didn't just obscure vision. It erased people from existence. The 46-year-old from Washington was hauling lumber from Eugene, Oregon to Seattle on a drizzly November morning in 2020 when he entered a fog bank on Highway 5 that would teach him the terrifying difference between being lost and being erased. The fog appeared suddenly around 6 a.m., rolling across the highway like a living entity. Leonard slowed to 40 miles per hour, his visibility reduced to maybe 50 feet. Other vehicles became ghostly shapes in the white murk, their taillights dim red smudges barely visible. Leonard had driven through plenty of fog before. It was common in this region during fall and winter. But this fog felt different. It was thicker than normal, almost tangible, and it had a strange luminescence, as if lit from within by some unknown source. Leonard's CB radio crackled with chatter from other drivers navigating the fog. "This is bad visibility," a voice said. "Everyone slow down and use your hazards." Standard fog procedure, nothing unusual about the communication. But over the next 30 minutes, the CB chatter gradually diminished until Leonard was hearing only silence on the normal channels. "Breaker 19, this is Washington Len. Anyone out there?" Leonard transmitted, trying to raise other drivers. Static answered him. He tried multiple channels, but the silence was complete, as if every other trucker in Oregon had simultaneously turned off their radios or disappeared. Leonard checked his mirrors, looking for other vehicles. The highway behind him was empty, no headlights, no shapes, nothing but the luminous fog. Leonard looked ahead, also empty. He was alone on a major interstate highway during morning rush hour, which should have been impossible. I-5 was one of the busiest highways on the West Coast, carrying thousands of vehicles daily. Even in thick fog, there should have been traffic. Leonard's unease transformed into fear when he noticed the mile markers. He'd been driving for 40 minutes since entering the fog, covering approximately 25 miles at his reduced speed. But the mile marker that appeared in his headlights showed the same number as the marker he'd passed when he first entered the fog. He'd driven 25 miles but hadn't advanced at all according to the markers. Leonard pulled over onto the shoulder and climbed out, needing to understand what was happening. The fog was cold against his skin, wet but not quite like normal water vapor. It had a texture, almost oily, and it clung to him like cobwebs. Leonard walked a few steps away from his truck and turned back. His truck was gone. Not hidden by fog, but absent, as if it had never existed. Leonard could see perhaps 10 feet in any direction, and beyond that boundary nothing existed. The fog had erased his truck. Leonard ran back to where his truck should have been, hands outstretched, searching for the solid metal that should have been there. His hands found nothing. The truck was gone, truly gone, not merely invisible. Leonard felt panic rising in his throat. He was standing on a highway shoulder, or what should have been a highway shoulder, but he couldn't see pavement beneath his feet. The fog had become so thick that it obscured even the ground, creating the sensation of standing on nothing, suspended in a white void. Leonard tried to stay calm. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not even a searching indicator, just complete absence of connectivity. His phone's GPS was malfunctioning, showing his location as coordinates that didn't correspond to any place on Earth. 0.0 DGN, 0.0 DGW, null coordinates nowhere. A sound emerged from the fog, voices faint and distant calling out in confusion and fear. "Hello? Is anyone there? Where am I? My car is gone. I can't find the road." The voices were other travelers, Leonard realized, other people who'd been caught in this erasure fog, separated from their vehicles and each other, all of them trapped in a white void where distance and direction had ceased to have meaning. Leonard called out, I'm here. Can you hear me? His voice seemed to be absorbed by the fog, traveling only a few feet before being muffled into silence. He heard responses, but they came from all directions simultaneously, making it impossible to determine where the other people actually were. Leonard tried to walk toward one of the voices, but after walking for several minutes, he found himself back at his starting point, or what he thought was his starting point. In the featureless fog, every location looked identical, making navigation impossible. Leonard realized the fog wasn't just obscuring vision, it was erasing spatial relationships. Distance and direction no longer functioned normally. Walking in a straight line could loop back on itself, or deposit someone in a completely different location, or move them nowhere at all. The fog had created a non-space, a zone where the normal rules of three-dimensional existence had been suspended. Hours passed, though Leonard's watch had stopped advancing, its hands frozen at 6:47 a.m., the moment he'd entered the fog. Leonard encountered other travelers occasionally, brief glimpses of shapes in the white murk, sometimes human forms that would appear for a second then vanish, sometimes vehicles that materialized and then dissipated like ghosts. But he couldn't make sustained contact with anyone. The fog kept everyone isolated, separated by barriers that weren't physical but were nonetheless impenetrable. Leonard found a semi-truck at one point, not his truck but someone else's, abandoned and empty. Inside the cab, Leonard found a logbook. The last entry was dated March 15, 1994, 26 years earlier. This truck and its driver had been trapped in the fog for over 2 decades, and the driver was presumably still here somewhere, wandering in the white void separated from their vehicle, unable to escape or make contact with the outside world. Leonard discovered other vehicles over the following hours. Cars, trucks, even a bus, all abandoned, all with logbooks or documents showing they'd entered the fog at different times spanning decades. Some vehicles were old, from the 1980s or even earlier, corroded and decayed despite being preserved in the timeless fog. Others were relatively new, their engines still warm, their drivers missing only minutes or hours. The fog was collecting travelers, Leonard understood. It had been doing so for years, pulling vehicles and people into its erasure zone, separating drivers from their machines, isolating everyone in individual bubbles of white nothingness. And no one ever escaped. The fog held them all, erasing them from normal space, from normal time, from existence itself in any meaningful sense. Leonard began to understand something else. The fog was erasing him gradually, not just spatially, but existentially. He was starting to forget things. His wife's name, his home address, his own birthday. The fog was consuming his memories, his identity, reducing him to a consciousness without context, without history, without connection to the life he'd lived before entering this white void. Leonard sat down, or thought he sat down, though he couldn't feel ground beneath him, and tried to hold on to his remaining memories through sheer will. He repeated his name over and over. Leonard Hayes, Leonard Hayes. He tried to visualize his wife's face, his house, his truck, anything concrete that would anchor him to his real life. But the memories kept slipping away, dissolving like smoke, erased by the fog that was consuming not just his present but his entire past. Then, unexpectedly, the fog began to thin. It happened gradually at first, visibility extending from 10 feet to 20 feet to 50 feet. Leonard could see pavement beneath him. Actual highway pavement, solid and real. His truck materialized nearby, exactly where he'd left it, as if it had never disappeared. Other vehicles appeared on the highway, traffic resuming as drivers emerged from whatever isolated bubbles the fog had trapped them in. The fog dissipated completely, revealing a normal November morning, overcast but clear. The white murk gone as if it had never existed. Leonard checked his watch. It showed 7:03 a.m. Only 16 minutes had passed in external time, though Leonard had subjectively experienced hours in the fog. He checked his phone. It showed full signal, GPS functioning normally, displaying his actual location on I-5 in Oregon. Leonard climbed back into his truck on shaking legs and checked his mirrors. Traffic was flowing normally now, dozens of vehicles visible both ahead and behind. It was as if the fog had never happened, as if the erasure zone had been a brief anomaly that had now closed, releasing its captured travelers back into normal space and time. But Leonard knew he hadn't been released. He'd been spat out, ejected from the fog's erasure zone before the process was complete. The fog had tried to erase him but had run out of time, forced to dissipate before it could finish consuming his existence. Leonard had escaped, but others hadn't. Those earlier travelers whose vehicles he'd found, whose logbooks showed decades of entrapment, they were still there, still trapped in the fog's timeless white void, still wandering in a space that existed between locations, still being gradually erased from existence and memory both. Leonard completed his delivery to Seattle but immediately took a week off, the first unscheduled break he'd taken in 5 years. He couldn't stop thinking about the fog, about the people trapped inside it, about how close he'd come to joining them in permanent erasure. Leonard tried to report the incident to authorities, but what could he say? That he'd been trapped in a fog that erased people from existence? That he'd found decades-old abandoned vehicles in a space that didn't appear on any map? That he'd experienced hours while only minutes passed in the real world? Leonard kept driving, but he never entered fog willingly again. If fog appeared on his route, he would pull over and wait for it to clear, no matter how long that took. He'd radio ahead to warn other drivers, though most ignored him, thinking he was overreacting to normal weather conditions. But a few drivers, the experienced ones, the ones who'd been on the roads long enough to know that sometimes nature manifested things that couldn't be explained, would pull over and wait with him, respecting the warning even if they didn't fully understand the danger. And Leonard wondered about the fog's nature. Was it a natural phenomenon? Some atmospheric condition that created zones of spatial distortion? Or was it something else, something conscious and purposeful, a predatory phenomenon that hunted travelers, collecting them in its erasure zone where they would be gradually consumed, their existence deleted from reality piece by piece until nothing remained but abandoned vehicles and forgotten memories? Leonard never found answers. He only knew that the fog appeared periodically on highways throughout the Pacific Northwest, mostly in fall and winter, mostly in early morning or late evening. It would roll across the road without warning, and anyone who entered it risked being caught in the erasure zone, separated from their vehicle, isolated in a white void where space and time no longer functioned normally. Some people emerged after minutes or hours, confused but intact. Others never emerged at all, their vehicles eventually found abandoned, their final fates unknown, their existences erased so completely that even people who'd known them would gradually forget they'd ever existed. Their memories consumed by the same fog that had consumed the person. The fog that erased people is still out there, Leonard knows. Still rolling across highways, still trapping travelers, still consuming existence itself. And every time Leonard sees fog on the highway ahead, he slows down and prepares to pull over, knowing that some fog is more than water vapor and darkness. Some fog is a doorway to erasure, a gateway to a white void where everything, vehicles, people, memories, existence itself, can be dissolved and forgotten, leaving behind nothing but abandoned machines as evidence that someone once traveled this way and was taken by the fog that erases. Story 2. The truck stop that sold futures. Maria Sanchez discovered a truck stop off I-10 in Arizona in June 2021 that didn't sell standard convenience store items. It sold futures packaged and priced, allowing customers to purchase the outcomes they wanted for their lives. The 39-year-old driver from New Mexico pulled into what appeared to be a normal facility around 2 a.m., needing fuel and a snack before continuing to Los Angeles. The truck stop looked standard from the outside. Fuel pumps, a convenience store with bright fluorescent lighting, a small diner. But when Maria walked into the store, she noticed the shelves weren't stocked with chips and candy. Instead, they held small boxes, each labeled with future outcomes. Successful career, $47.99. Happy marriage, $83.50. Healthy children, $125. Financial security, $201.75. Maria assumed it was some kind of promotional display or art installation, but the clerk behind the counter, a thin, elderly man with knowing eyes, gestured to the shelves. Everything's for sale. Choose the future you want, pay the price, and it's yours. This is a joke, right? Maria asked. No joke. I sell futures. Real outcomes, guaranteed results. You want a successful business? Buy that box. You want to avoid cancer? That one prevents it. You want your children to attend good colleges? That ensures it. Every possible future is available for purchase, priced according to its value and probability. Maria laughed nervously and picked up a box labeled Long Life, $499. The box was light, seemingly empty, with no indication of what it actually contained. What's inside? The future itself, the clerk explained. Not a physical object, but a probability adjustment. When you purchase and open that box, you align your timeline with a version of reality where you live a long life. The futures are quantum products. They collapse probability waves in your favor, ensuring the outcome you've purchased actually occurs. That's impossible, is it? How do you know? Have you tried? The clerk smiled. I've been selling futures for 43 years. Thousands of customers. All of them got exactly what they paid for. The skeptics who didn't buy. Their lives unfolded randomly, subject to chance. But those who purchased, their futures manifested precisely as advertised. Maria looked around the store, reading other labels. No major accidents, $156. Loving parents, $89.50. Career fulfillment, $312.25. Death at age 95, $875. The prices varied wildly, seemingly based on how valuable or unlikely each outcome was. How does pricing work? Maria asked, still not believing but curious about the system's logic. Supply and demand, like anything else. Common likely futures are cheap. Rare, improbable futures are expensive. A happy marriage is moderately priced because it's achievable for most people with effort. But death at age 95? That's expensive because it requires numerous unlikely circumstances, avoiding all accidents, diseases, violence for nearly a century. It's probability manipulation on a grand scale, which costs more. Maria picked up another box. No regrets, $1,247.50. The price was astronomical compared to others. Why is this one so expensive? Because it's nearly impossible. Living without regrets requires making perfect decisions at every junction, knowing outcomes in advance, having godlike wisdom. It's the most expensive future I sell because it's the most unlikely to occur naturally. But if you pay the price, I guarantee it. You'll live a life completely free of regret, making only choices you'll be satisfied with forever. Maria was still skeptical, but something about the clerk's certainty made her uneasy. What if this was real? What if futures could actually be purchased? She looked at her own life. Single at 39, no children, a career she found unfulfilling, financial instability, health concerns. Her life wasn't terrible, but it wasn't what she'd hoped for either. If she could purchase a better future. I can't afford these prices, Maria said, looking at the boxes that promised the outcomes she wanted. Happy relationship, $83.50. Career fulfillment, $312.25. Financial security, $201.75. Even the cheapest desirable futures were beyond her current budget. I offer payment plans, the clerk said. You can purchase on credit, pay over time. The future manifests immediately, but you owe the debt. What happens if I don't pay? The clerk's smile faded. The future is repossessed. Everything you gained is taken back, often with interest. A woman purchased loving marriage on credit 5 years ago. She met her soulmate, married, had wonderful years together. But she defaulted on payments last month. Her husband left her, filed for divorce, as if the love had never existed. The purchased future was reclaimed because she didn't fulfill her payment obligation. Maria felt sick. That's cruel. It's business. Futures aren't free, they must be paid for, one way or another. Most people pay with money. But there are other currencies. The clerk gestured to a different section of the store where boxes had different labels. Successful career, cost, 10 years of youth. Perfect health, cost, all your memories of your mother. Great wealth, cost, your ability to feel happiness. These futures can be purchased with non-monetary costs, the clerk explained. You can trade parts of yourself, years of life, memories, emotions, relationships, to gain futures you want. A man once purchased genius intelligence by trading his ability to connect emotionally with others. He became brilliant but utterly isolated. Was it worth it? He says yes. His family says no. Everyone values futures differently. Maria was horrified and fascinated. She looked at a box labeled Career Fulfillment Cost, your relationship with your sister. The price was non-monetary, requiring Maria to sacrifice her bond with her younger sister Elena, whom she loved dearly. But career fulfillment had eluded Maria her entire life. If she could have meaningful work, a career that brought satisfaction and purpose, would it be worth losing her sister? I can see you're tempted, the clerk observed. Most people are. They come in skeptical. But when they see futures they've dreamed of available for purchase, the temptation becomes overwhelming. Some people spend hours in this store debating which futures to buy, calculating what they're willing to pay or trade. It's the most honest store in America. Everything has a clear price and you get exactly what you pay for. Maria forced herself to step away from the shelves. I need to think about this. Of course. But I should mention, this truck stop only appears to each person once. If you leave without purchasing, you'll never find it again. This is your only opportunity to buy your future. Choose carefully. Maria walked out of the store, intending to return to her truck and drive away. But she couldn't stop thinking about the boxes, the futures they promised, the possibility of actually determining her own outcomes rather than leaving everything to chance. She turned around and walked back into the store. I want career fulfillment, Maria said, but I can't trade my sister for it. Is there another cost? The clerk checked a computer behind the counter. Career fulfillment can be purchased for $3.12 or $25 or traded for your relationship with your sister, 15 years of life expectancy, all memories of your first love, your ability to enjoy music, or 3 years of someone else's happiness. We'd randomly select someone in the world and reduce their happiness for 3 years to pay for yours. Maria was disturbed by the final option. I'd be stealing someone else's happiness. All futures have costs. You can pay them yourself or transfer them to others. Many customers choose to transfer costs, buying good health by giving disease to strangers, buying wealth by taking money from random people, buying long life by shortening someone else's. It's all available, all for sale, all perfectly legal within the rules of probability manipulation. Maria struggled with the ethics. She didn't want to hurt her sister, didn't want to give up years of life, didn't want to forget her first love, didn't want to lose her enjoyment of music. But she also desperately wanted career fulfillment, wanted to wake up every day feeling purposeful and satisfied with her work. After agonizing deliberation, Maria made her decision. "I'll pay $312.25 cash. I'll take career fulfillment without trading anything else." The clerk rang up the purchase, and Maria paid with money she'd been saving for truck repairs. The clerk handed her the box, a simple cardboard container, very light, seemingly empty. "Open it whenever you're ready. The moment you open it, your future adjusts. Career fulfillment will manifest within 6 months, guaranteed." Maria took the box and left the store. She sat in her truck, holding the box, terrified and excited. This was insane. It couldn't be real. But what if it was? Maria opened the box. It was empty, just as it had appeared. But the moment Maria looked inside, she felt something shift. Not physically, but existentially. As if reality had been adjusted slightly. Probability waves collapsing in her favor. Maria didn't feel different, but she sensed that her future had been altered. That career fulfillment was now inevitable rather than uncertain. Maria drove to Los Angeles and completed her delivery. Over the following months, her life changed in unexpected ways. She met someone at a truck stop who mentioned a company looking for drivers with her exact experience. She applied and was hired immediately at triple her previous salary. The new job was everything she'd hoped for: meaningful work, good pay, supportive colleagues, a sense of purpose. Within 6 months, Maria had the career fulfillment she'd purchased. But Maria couldn't enjoy it completely. She kept thinking about the truck stop, about the future she hadn't purchased, about the costs other people had paid or transferred. Had someone else lost career fulfillment to give it to her? Had the money she'd paid gone toward balancing some cosmic ledger? Was future selling ethical? Or was it a form of predatory commerce, taking advantage of desperate people who'd pay anything for better outcomes? Maria tried to find the truck stop again, driving the same stretch of I-10 dozens of times, but it never appeared. Just as the clerk had promised, it only appeared once to each customer. Maria had made her purchase and would never have another opportunity to buy futures, which meant every other aspect of her life would unfold randomly, subject to chance rather than guaranteed outcomes. Maria thinks about the future she didn't buy: good health, long life, happy relationships, financial security. She wonders if she should have prioritized differently, should have purchased different outcomes. She sees people around her living good lives and wonders how many of them purchased their futures at that truck stop. How many are living guaranteed outcomes rather than random chance? And Maria wonders about the nature of the store. Was the clerk human or something else? Was he really selling futures, or was he selling elaborate placebos that worked through psychological self-fulfilling prophecy? Did Maria's career improve because reality was adjusted, or because she believed it would improve and therefore made choices that led to that outcome? Maria has no answers. She only knows that somewhere off I-10 in Arizona, a truck stop appears to travelers once in their lifetime, selling futures in cardboard boxes, offering guaranteed outcomes for those willing to pay the price. And Maria knows she purchased one future but left dozens of others unbought, meaning her life will be a mix of guaranteed career fulfillment and random chance in everything else. A hybrid existence where one aspect is controlled and all others remain subject to the unpredictable probability waves that govern normal reality for those who never found the truck stop that sells futures, who never saw futures packaged and priced, who never faced the temptation to purchase outcomes rather than earning them through the traditional methods of effort and luck. Story 3. The CB radio that received distress calls from the future. Thomas Garrett's CB radio began receiving emergency broadcasts from accidents that hadn't happened yet, giving him warnings of crashes, breakdowns, and disasters that would occur hours or days in the future. The 51-year-old from Tennessee first noticed it in September 2022 while hauling furniture from Nashville to Atlanta. His CB, tuned to Channel 19, suddenly crackled with a panicked voice. Mayday, Mayday, this is driver Thomas Garrett. My truck has jackknifed on I-75 at mile marker 284, trailer fire, requesting immediate assistance. Thomas was startled to hear his own name and voice on the radio, but he was currently at mile marker 320, over 30 miles from the reported location, and his truck was running fine with no indication of problems. Thomas keyed his mic. "This is Thomas Garrett. I'm nowhere near mile marker 284. Who is this?" The panicked voice, his own voice, responded, "This is Thomas Garrett. Who the hell are you? I need help. My truck is on fire." Thomas realized he was receiving a transmission from his own future, from a version of himself hours ahead in time who'd experienced an accident. The broadcast was traveling backward through time, warning present Thomas about what would happen to future Thomas. Thomas checked the time. 2:47 p.m. He drove carefully, watching for any signs of mechanical problems, trying to understand how to prevent the accident his future self had reported. As Thomas approached mile marker 284, he slowed to 40 miles per hour and examined the road carefully. Nothing appeared dangerous. Traffic was light, weather was clear, the road surface looked fine. But Thomas remembered the future broadcast: jackknife, trailer fire, requesting assistance. He pulled onto the shoulder before reaching mile marker 284 and inspected his truck thoroughly. Thomas found a problem he'd missed during his pre-trip inspection. One of his trailer's brake lines was damaged, leaking brake fluid. If Thomas had continued driving at highway speed, the brake failure could have caused exactly the jackknife and potential fire his future self had reported. By receiving the warning from the future and stopping to investigate, Thomas prevented the accident, changing his timeline so the future broadcast never happened. But the broadcasts continued. Thomas's CB began regularly receiving distress calls from the future. Sometimes from Thomas himself, sometimes from other drivers, all of them reporting accidents or emergencies that hadn't occurred yet. Thomas would hear a driver screaming about a tire blowout at a specific location, and hours later, Thomas would pass that location and see a truck with a blown tire being towed away. He'd hear someone reporting a multi-vehicle pileup during a storm, and the next day that pileup would occur exactly as described. Thomas tried to warn other drivers when he heard future broadcasts about their accidents, but they rarely believed him. How could Thomas know their names, their locations, their specific problems before they occurred? Most drivers thought Thomas was pranking them or had somehow hacked their CB identification. A few listened, pulled over to inspect their trucks, and sometimes found the problems Thomas had warned about. Those few Thomas saved. The rest drove on and later experienced exactly the accidents their future selves had broadcast backward through time. Thomas's CB became a burden. He heard disasters constantly. Some he could prevent, most he couldn't. He heard drivers dying in crashes, broadcasting their final moments backward through time, their deaths becoming warnings that arrived too late or were ignored. Thomas heard his own death multiple times, different scenarios, different locations, different causes. Each one a possible future that could be avoided if Thomas made the right choices. One broadcast haunted Thomas above all others. He heard a young woman, maybe 25 years old, screaming that her truck's brakes had failed on a mountain grade, that she was accelerating out of control, that she couldn't stop. She broadcast her location: I-40 westbound, mountain descent outside Asheville, North Carolina. She screamed names of family members, saying goodbye to children, her voice rising in terror as her speed increased and the inevitable crash approached. Then the transmission ended in a catastrophic sound of impact and metal tearing. Thomas checked the timestamp his CB receiver showed for the broadcast. 3 days in the future. Thomas had 3 days to find this woman, to warn her about the brake failure, to prevent her death. But he didn't know her name, Didn't know what company she drove for, didn't have any identifying information except her voice and the location of her future accident. Thomas drove to Asheville and parked near the mountain descent where the accident would occur. He spent 3 days stopping every female truck driver he saw, warning them about potential brake failure, begging them to have their brakes inspected before attempting the mountain descent. Most thought he was insane. A few agreed to have brakes checked, though none found problems. Thomas couldn't prevent an accident he couldn't specifically identify, couldn't save someone whose name he didn't know. On the 3rd day, at the exact time the future broadcast had indicated, Thomas heard sirens. A truck had lost its brakes on the mountain descent exactly as predicted. The driver, a young woman just as Thomas had heard, died in the crash. Thomas had received her distress call 3 days in advance and still couldn't save her. The future was knowable but not always changeable. Thomas became obsessed with the broadcasts, spending more time monitoring his CB than driving, trying to decode future warnings, trying to save people who would die if he didn't intervene. But the future was complex, the broadcasts often ambiguous, and Thomas's ability to change outcomes was limited. He saved some people, failed to save others, and gradually broke under the psychological weight of knowing disasters before they occurred and often being helpless to prevent them. Thomas quit trucking after 6 months of receiving future broadcasts. He couldn't handle the constant stream of disasters, the knowledge of accidents waiting to happen, the guilt of failing to prevent deaths he'd been warned about. He donated his CB radio to a truck stop, hoping to pass the burden to someone else, but the radio's future receiving capabilities apparently didn't transfer. It functioned normally for its next owner, receiving only present-time transmissions. The ability to receive future broadcasts had been tied to Thomas somehow, not to the radio itself. Thomas still hears them occasionally, even without a CB, as if the connection to future timelines was permanent once established. He hears accidents that will happen tomorrow, next week, next year. He hears his own future deaths in various scenarios, showing him the multiple possible endings his life could have depending on choices he makes. He hears humanity's collective future, wars, disasters, plagues, broadcast backward through time by people living through tragedies that haven't happened yet for Thomas but are inevitable for them. Thomas lives as a shut-in now, trying to block out the future, broadcasts trying to exist only in the present moment. But the future is persistent, constantly transmitting backward, constantly warning about what's coming, constantly showing Thomas the accidents and disasters and deaths that await if timelines unfold as they're currently configured. And Thomas knows that somewhere in the future, maybe hours ahead, maybe days, maybe years, there's a timeline where Thomas receives a distress call from his own final moments, where future Thomas broadcasts backward to present Thomas, describing exactly how and when present Thomas will die, creating a temporal loop of warning and inevitability that Thomas can't escape no matter how many times he hears his own death approaching from the future. Story 4. The Road That Grew New Exits. Patricia Wells discovered that I-80 through Nebraska was growing new exits that led to places that shouldn't exist, towns that weren't on maps, cities that had never been built, destinations that existed in possibility rather than reality. The 47-year-old from Iowa first noticed it in April 2021 while hauling grain from Des Moines to Denver. Patricia knew I-80 through Nebraska intimately, having driven it hundreds of times. She knew every exit, every town, every service plaza. But on this particular night around 11 p.m., Patricia saw an exit sign she'd never seen before. Ashwood, next exit, services available. Ashwood wasn't a town Patricia recognized, and she prided herself on knowing every community along her regular routes. Curious, Patricia took the exit and followed a well-maintained road for about 3 miles before reaching the town. Ashwood appeared to be a thriving community of maybe 5,000 people. Downtown area with shops and restaurants, residential neighborhoods with tidy houses, All the infrastructure of a normal small town. Patricia stopped at a gas station to fuel and get coffee. The attendant was friendly. The prices were normal. Everything seemed completely ordinary. But when Patricia asked how long Ashwood had been here, the attendant looked confused. Forever? What do you mean? This town was founded in 1887. Patricia checked her phone's GPS. It showed her location as empty farmland, no town registered. But Patricia was clearly standing in a functioning gas station in a populated town. The GPS and reality were contradicting each other. Patricia drove around Ashwood, examining it more carefully. The town was too perfect, too new-looking despite the attendant's claim of 19th century founding. Every building was in excellent condition, every street clean, every citizen she saw well-dressed and content. It felt like a movie set, a constructed reality rather than an authentic town that had evolved organically over 130 years. Patricia left Ashwood and returned to I-80, making note of the exit number. When she checked maps later, that exit number led to a rest area, not a town. Ashwood didn't exist in any official records, on any GPS system, in any state database. But Patricia had been there, had fueled her truck, had drunk coffee, had driven through streets and seen people. The town was real even if it wasn't officially recognized. Over the following months, Patricia discovered more new exits on I-80. Exits that appeared and disappeared, leading to destinations that existed only sometimes, only for certain travelers, only when reality's boundaries became permeable enough to allow access to places that existed in potential rather than actuality. She found a city called New Omaha, much larger and more modern than actual Omaha, thriving with technology and prosperity. She found a small farming community called Haven, where everyone seemed genuinely happy, living in perfect harmony with each other and the land. She found a rest area called Last Stop that existed at the edge of reality, where travelers could see into multiple timelines simultaneously, choosing which version of the highway to continue on. Patricia realized I-80 was growing exits to alternate realities, creating access points where travelers could visit versions of Nebraska that existed in parallel timelines or possibility spaces. Each new exit led to a different variation of what could have been. Towns that were planned but never built. Cities that thrived in alternate histories, communities that existed only in imagination, until travelers' expectations manifested them into temporary reality. The new exits appeared and disappeared according to unknown rules. Sometimes Patricia would see an exit to Ashwood 3 times in 1 week. Other times, months would pass without any new exits appearing. Sometimes the exits led to the same alternate locations consistently. Other times, the same exit number would lead to completely different destinations, as if the road was constantly reconfiguring its connections to parallel spaces. Patricia met other drivers who'd discovered the new exits, who'd visited the alternate towns and cities, who understood that I-80 through Nebraska had become a highway connecting not just geographical locations, but ontological possibilities, linking different versions of reality through exit ramps that manifested when travelers were ready to see them. The road is evolving, one old-timer told Patricia at a real truck stop. It's developing connections to places that exist in quantum superposition. Locations that are simultaneously real and unreal, existing and non-existing, depending on whether they're being observed. When you take one of those new exits, your observation collapses the probability wave, making that particular alternate location temporarily real for you. But when you leave, it returns to superposition, existing and not existing simultaneously until the next traveler observes it. Patricia asked the obvious question. Why? Why is I-80 doing this? The old-timer shrugged. Roads accumulate consciousness after enough. Travelers use them. I-80 has been carrying hopes and dreams across the country for decades. All those drivers imaging better places, alternate lives, different possibilities. That imaginative energy had to go somewhere. It created new exits, new destinations, manifesting the places drivers wished existed. The road is giving us what we imagine, showing us the alternate Nebraskas that could have been if history had unfolded differently. Patricia continued driving I-80, watching for new exits, visiting alternate destinations when they appeared. She saw versions of Nebraska that were more prosperous, more developed, more beautiful than the real one. She also saw darker versions. Towns that had been destroyed by disasters, cities that had never recovered from economic collapse, communities gripped by dystopian control. The new exits showed Patricia the full spectrum of possibility, all the versions of Nebraska that existed in the superposition of parallel timelines, waiting to be observed and temporarily collapsed into reality. And Patricia understood that every road carried similar potential, that every highway could develop new exits to alternate places if enough consciousness flowed through it, if enough travelers imagined different destinations. Patricia still drives I-80, still watches for exits that shouldn't exist, still visits towns and cities that aren't on maps but are nonetheless real when she observes them. And Patricia knows that somewhere, on some version of I-80 in some parallel Nebraska, there's an exit with her name on it, leading to a place that exists because Patricia imagined it. Because her consciousness during thousands of trips across Nebraska created a possibility space that manifested into temporary reality, a destination that exists only when she visits it and returns to quantum superposition when she leaves, waiting patiently for her next observation to collapse it back into existence. A personal, alternate Nebraska that belongs to Patricia alone, accessible through an exit that appears only for her. Only when she's ready to see it. Only when reality's boundaries are thin enough to allow passage between what is and what could be. Story 5. The truck that aged backwards. Kevin Morrison's truck began aging in reverse in July 2020, growing younger and more pristine with every mile driven. The 36-year-old from Oregon first noticed it after purchasing a used 2005 Freightliner with 800,000 miles on the odometer. The truck was worn but functional, exactly what Kevin could afford as he started his career as an owner-operator. Kevin expected the truck to gradually deteriorate with use, as all vehicles do. But after his first week of driving, Kevin noticed the opposite was happening. Small scratches on the paint were disappearing. Worn upholstery was becoming less faded. The engine was running smoother, quieter, more efficiently than when he'd purchased it. At first, Kevin assumed he was imagining improvements or misremembering the truck's initial condition. But after a month of driving, the changes were undeniable. The truck looked newer, felt newer, performed better than it had when Kevin bought it. The odometer still advanced normally, showing increasing mileage, but the physical condition was improving rather than deteriorating. Kevin took the truck to a mechanic for inspection. The mechanic was baffled. "I don't understand. You say you've driven 15,000 miles in the past month, but this truck looks like it has only 200,000 miles of wear. Not 15,000. The engine components are too new, the transmission too smooth, the suspension too tight. Either you replaced every major system or this truck is aging backward." Kevin hadn't replaced anything. The truck was aging backward, growing younger and more pristine with every mile Kevin drove. Kevin researched reverse aging phenomena and found a few references to objects that exhibited temporal reversal. Clocks that ran backward, wine that grew younger instead of older, trees that grew smaller over time. But vehicles aging in reverse were unprecedented. Kevin continued driving, documenting the truck's reverse aging carefully. After 6 months, his 2005 Freightliner looked and performed like a brand new truck. After a year, it looked better than new. as if it had been built with superior materials and craftsmanship than the actual 2005 model. After 18 months, the truck had regressed past its manufacture date, taking on characteristics of older Freightliner models from the 1990s, its technology and design retrograding to earlier eras. The reverse aging accelerated. Kevin's truck began cycling backward through decades of automotive evolution, passing through 1980s designs, then 1970s, then 1960s. The modern digital dashboard reverted to analog gauges. The automatic transmission became manual. The diesel engine changed characteristics, eventually becoming a gasoline engine as the truck regressed past the era of widespread diesel adoption. Kevin watched his truck become an antique, then a classic, then a historical curiosity. It cycled backward through the entire history of trucking, becoming more primitive with every mile driven. By the 2-year mark, Kevin's truck had regressed to something resembling a 1950s hauler. Large and blocky, with minimal safety features, basic technology. Other drivers began noticing Kevin's truck. At truck stops, people would photograph it, ask where Kevin had found such a perfectly restored vintage vehicle. Kevin couldn't explain that he hadn't restored anything. The truck was restoring itself, aging backward through automotive history, approaching some origin point Kevin couldn't predict. The reverse aging created practical problems. As the truck regressed technologically, it became less compliant with modern regulations. It lacked emissions controls, safety features, electronic logging capabilities. Kevin received citations for driving a non-compliant vehicle, but he couldn't explain to authorities that his truck was literally aging backward and he had no control over the process. Kevin tried selling the truck, but potential buyers were confused by its contradictory characteristics. Odometer showing high mileage, but condition appearing ancient yet pristine. Technology from multiple eras coexisting incoherently. The truck was unsellable, too weird to interest normal buyers, too anomalous to interest collectors. The regression continued. Kevin's truck passed through 1940s designs, then 1930s, then 1920s. It became increasingly difficult to drive as modern roads weren't designed for such primitive vehicles. The truck's maximum speed dropped as it regressed to earlier technological eras. Kevin could barely maintain 40 miles per hour in a vehicle that had forgotten how to go faster, having regressed past the innovations that enabled highway speeds. Kevin finally stopped driving when his truck regressed to something resembling a 1910s hauler, little more than a motorized wagon, barely capable of moving under its own power. The truck sat in Kevin's driveway, continuing to age backward even when stationary, slowly becoming more primitive, less mechanical, gradually approaching the pre-automotive era. Kevin watched his truck dissolve backward through technological history. The engine simplified, lost components, eventually disappeared entirely as the vehicle regressed past the invention of internal combustion. The truck became a horse-drawn wagon, then just a wagon frame, then wooden components that looked handcrafted from an even earlier era. Finally, after 3 years of reverse aging, Kevin's truck vanished completely. It had regressed all the way back to before it existed in any form, to the raw materials it had been constructed from, to the trees and ore and resources that had predated its manufacture. Those materials dispersed, returning to whatever locations they'd originated from, and Kevin was left with an empty driveway where his truck had been, holding only a title to a vehicle that had aged backward out of existence. Kevin never discovered why his truck had aged in reverse. Was it exposed to some unknown radiation? Was it affected by temporal anomalies along his routes? Was it manufactured from materials that had been contaminated by reverse time particles? Kevin had no answers, only memories of watching his truck regress through over a century of automotive history before finally aging backward past the point of existence itself. Kevin works as a company driver now, refusing to own another truck, afraid that whatever caused his first truck to age backward might affect any vehicle he purchases. He drives modern trucks that age normally, that deteriorate with use as they should, that follow time's arrow forward rather than backward. But Kevin knows that somewhere in the world, objects are aging in reverse, moving backward through history, eventually regressing out of existence entirely. And he wonders how many other things, vehicles, buildings, perhaps even people, are silently aging backward, unnoticed until they've regressed so far that their reverse temporal flow becomes obvious, by which point it's too late to stop the process, too late to prevent the inevitable regression to nothingness that awaits anything caught in the backward flow of time. Story 6. The convoy that drove in circles. Raymond Tucker joined a convoy of 18 trucks on I-40 through New Mexico in October 2021 that was traveling in a perfect circle without any of the drivers realizing it. The 53-year-old from Texas fell in behind the convoy around midnight, planning to run with them for safety and companionship through the empty desert night. The convoy maintained perfect formation, 18 trucks spaced evenly, all moving at 65 miles per hour, running eastbound on I-40. Raymond settled into position at the back of the convoy and enjoyed the sense of community, watching the chain of red taillights stretching ahead like a necklace of rubies on black velvet. After 2 hours of driving, Raymond noticed something odd. He'd passed the same distinctive rock formation twice, a tall spire of red rock visible from the highway, unmistakable in its shape. Raymond thought maybe there were two similar formations, but when he passed the same formation a third time 30 minutes later, he knew something was wrong. The convoy was driving in a loop, somehow circling back on itself, passing the same landmarks repeatedly despite the highway appearing to continue straight ahead. Raymond grabbed his CB and keyed the mic. "Breaker 19, this is Texas Ray. Has anyone else noticed we keep passing the same landmarks? I think we're driving in circles." A voice responded from one of the trucks ahead. "Texas Ray, this is Mountain Mike. What are you talking about? We've been making steady progress eastbound for 2 hours. Haven't seen any repeated landmarks." "I've passed the same rock formation 3 times, Raymond insisted. "A tall red spire, maybe a quarter-mile south of the highway. It's unmistakable." Other drivers chimed in, some agreeing with Raymond, some insisting they hadn't seen any repeated landmarks. The convoy seemed to be in disagreement about whether they were making progress or driving in circles. Raymond checked his GPS. It showed steady eastbound progress, mile markers advancing normally, no indication of circular motion. But Raymond's eyes told him differently. He recognized more landmarks now. A certain curve in the road, a specific bridge over a dry wash, an abandoned gas station. The convoy was definitely looping, passing the same 20-mile stretch of highway repeatedly, though somehow the mile markers and GPS insisted they were advancing normally. Raymond tried to exit the convoy, but when he slowed to take the next off-ramp, he found himself unable to leave. His truck wouldn't respond properly, the steering locked straight ahead, the brakes barely slowed him, and he was forced to continue with the convoy. Other drivers who tried to exit reported the same problem. They were trapped in formation, unable to break away, compelled to continue driving in the circular loop. Hours passed. Raymond counted 15 complete circuits of the same 20-mile stretch, watching the same landmarks pass again and again while his odometer and GPS insisted he'd traveled nearly 1,000 miles eastbound. The convoy was stuck in a spatial loop, driving the same section of highway repeatedly while perceiving and recording it as linear progress. Dawn approached, or should have approached, but the sky remained perpetually dark, locked in the same midnight hour when Raymond had joined the convoy. Time wasn't advancing normally. The convoy was trapped in a temporal loop as well as a spatial one, driving the same 20 miles during the same hour forever. unable to advance either geographically or chronologically. Raymond talked to other drivers via CB, trying to understand what had trapped them. The lead driver, a woman who'd been driving for 30 years, had a theory. We're in a sinkhole. Not a physical sinkhole, but a spatial one. Some kind of loop in reality where space curves back on itself. We're driving straight ahead, but space is curved so strongly here that straight ahead leads back to where we started. We're trapped on a Mobius strip of highway, doomed to drive this same section forever. How do we escape? Raymond asked desperately. I don't know. I've been trying for the past 6 hours. Can't exit, can't stop, can't break formation. We're all trapped together. 18 trucks driving in a circle for eternity. Raymond refused to accept this fate. He began experimenting, trying different speeds, different lanes, different positions in the convoy. He discovered that if he drove slower than the convoy, he'd gradually drift backward relative to the other trucks, eventually reaching the back of the formation and then, instead of falling behind completely, appearing at the front. The convoy was a closed loop, not just spatially but sequentially, with no beginning or end. Just a circular chain of 18 trucks forever following each other. One driver tried stopping completely, parking on the shoulder to break the loop, but the moment his truck stopped moving, it vanished from perception. Raymond could no longer see it on the road, couldn't raise the driver on CB as if stopping meant being erased from the loop entirely. The driver who'd stopped might have escaped or might have been deleted from reality. Raymond had no way to know. As Raymond completed his 30th circuit of the 20-mile loop, having subjectively driven 600 miles while actually traveling 20 miles repeatedly, he noticed cracks appearing in the road. Not physical cracks, but glitches in reality. The pavement would flicker, becoming transparent momentarily, showing something underneath that looked like raw probability rather than solid matter. The sky would tear, revealing other skies behind it. Day skies behind the night sky. Different weather conditions stacked like layers. The loop was destabilizing, Raymond realized. Whatever spatial and temporal anomaly had created it was failing. The Mobius strip of highway unraveling. Raymond felt the convoy accelerating despite no one pressing their accelerators harder. Space itself was speeding up, trying to eject the trapped trucks before the loop collapsed completely. The convoy burst out of the loop like a cork from a bottle, all 18 trucks suddenly ejecting onto normal I-40 and normal space and time. Raymond found himself in daylight, hundreds of miles east of where he'd entered the loop, his truck's clock showing 8 a.m., though he'd only experienced 6 hours of driving since midnight. The convoy had compressed those 6 hours of subjective time into 8 hours of objective time while traveling circular miles that counted as linear miles once the loop was escaped. The 18 trucks gradually dispersed, drivers too shaken to maintain convoy formation, each heading to their individual destinations. Grateful to be back in normal space-time, but traumatized by the hours spent driving in circles on a Mobius highway that looped back on itself infinitely. Raymond never joined another convoy after that night. He couldn't trust that other formations weren't also trapped in spatial loops, driving the same miles repeatedly while thinking they were making progress, locked in circles they couldn't perceive because space had curved so severely that straight ahead led backward to the beginning. And Raymond wonders how many other convoys are out there right now, trapped in their own loops, driving the same stretches of highway forever. Their drivers unaware they're in circles because the loop is so perfectly constructed that it appears to be linear progress, their GPS and odometers reporting advancement while they actually spiral endlessly through the same 20 miles, the same hour, the same landmark, passing again and again, a convoy eternally chasing its own tail on a highway that feeds back into itself, creating the most perfect prison imaginable, one where the prisoners don't even know they're trapped. Story 7. The rest area where everyone spoke backwards. Dorothy Martinez stopped at a rest area on I-15 in Nevada in August 2022 where everyone spoke in reverse language, their words and sentences backward but delivered with normal timing and intonation, creating comprehensible meaning only when Dorothy's brain processed the reversed speech. The 44-year-old from California pulled into the rest area needing a bathroom break and coffee during a late-night drive from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. The rest area was moderately busy, maybe 20 people visible, using restrooms, walking paths, sitting at picnic tables. Dorothy walked toward the restroom building and heard a man on his phone. Ole, yeah, niod mi anif tsuje depotsta atser era. The words were backward. Hello as Ole, doing as Gnyod, stopped as Depots, but delivered smoothly, naturally, as if backward speech was normal. Dorothy assumed she was misheard or the man was speaking a language she didn't recognize. But as she walked past more people, she heard the same phenomenon. Everyone speaking with reversed phonetics, words backward but sentences flowing naturally. A woman talking to her child. Dorothy's brain automatically reversed the sounds. Come with me, time to go. Inside the restroom, Dorothy heard more backward speech from other women, all of them conversing normally from their perspectives but producing reversed phonetics that Dorothy's brain had to flip to understand. Dorothy tried speaking normally. Excuse me. But what came out of her mouth was, Esuksi. Her own speech had been reversed, her words leaving her mouth backward even though she'd thought them forward. Dorothy panicked and ran out of the restroom. She tried to get back to her truck, but disorientation made navigation difficult. The rest area's layout seemed reversed. Buildings on the wrong side, parking lots mirrored, everything flipped as if Dorothy was looking at the world through a mirror. She turned right to reach her truck, but found herself further away. She turned around and walked backward, which moved her forward toward her truck. Movement was reversed in addition to speech. Walking forward moved Dorothy backward. Walking backward moved her forward. Turning left rotated her right. Every motor action was inverted, requiring Dorothy to think and move in reverse to achieve normal results. Dorothy reached her truck and climbed inside, or rather she climbed outside, using reversed motor commands that resulted in entering the vehicle. She tried to start the engine but had to turn the key left instead of right, had to press the brake with her right foot instead of left, had to shift into reverse to go forward. Dorothy drove away from the rest area, or tried to, but navigation was nearly impossible with reversed motor controls. She crashed into a parking bumper, then overcorrected and nearly hit another vehicle. Other drivers honked at her, shouting reversed epithets that Dorothy's brain translated into normal obscenities. Finally, after painful trial and error, Dorothy escaped the rest area parking lot and merged onto I-15. The moment her truck crossed the threshold, leaving the rest area, reversal ceased. Her speech returned to normal. Her motor controls worked properly. The world flipped back to its correct orientation. Dorothy drove a mile down the highway and pulled over, shaking from the experience. Dorothy tried to rationalize what had happened. Had she experienced a stroke, causing her brain to process sensory information backward? Had she been exposed to some chemical or radiation that affected neural processing? But when Dorothy called her sister from the shoulder of I-15, her speech worked perfectly. Her motor controls were fine. Her perception was normal. Whatever had caused the reversal had been localized to the rest area itself. Dorothy researched the rest area and found scattered reports from other travelers describing similar experiences. Speech reversal, motor inversion, spatial mirroring. One theory proposed that the rest area existed in a zone of reversed entropy, where time's arrow pointed backward, causing all processes to reverse: speech, motion, even thought patterns. People inside the zone didn't notice the reversal because their brains were also reversed, processing backward inputs as normal. Only people entering from normal entropy space experience the disorientation of having forward-pointing consciousness in a backward-pointing zone. Another theory suggested the rest area was built on a site where two mirror image universes touched, creating a boundary zone where both orientations existed simultaneously. People in the rest area were experiencing reality from both perspectives, normal and mirrored, causing their outputs to reverse even while their internal experience remained normal. Dorothy never stopped at that rest area again. She'd drive hundreds of miles out of her way to avoid it, unable to handle the disorientation of reversed speech and motor controls. Other drivers who'd experienced the reversal reported similar avoidance, while drivers who'd never experienced it insisted the rest area was completely normal, suggesting the reversal only affected certain people or only occurred under specific conditions. Dorothy wonders if she's permanently changed by the experience. Sometimes she catches herself speaking reversed words briefly before correcting. Sometimes her motor controls feel inverted, her hands moving in directions she didn't intend. Sometimes she sees the world flipped, mirror image orientation overlaying normal vision. The rest area, where everyone spoke backwards, still operates normally from most perspectives. A standard facility serving thousands of travelers annually. But for those who experience the reversal, who hear backward speech, who struggle with inverted motor controls, who see the world flipped, the rest area becomes a nightmare of disorientation, a zone where the normal rules of sensory processing and motor output are inverted, creating a space where forward and backward are exchanged, where speech and thought point in opposite directions, where the experience of reality becomes so thoroughly reversed that escaping back to normal orientation feels like being born again. Learning for the second time how to speak and move and perceive in the direction time flows, the direction entropy increases, the direction most humans experience as forward, but which is ultimately arbitrary in a universe where both directions are equally valid, and where some places, like that cursed rest area on I-15 in Nevada, exist in the backward direction, reversed and inverted, a mirror world accessible through geographic boundaries where both orientations touch, and travelers can accidentally step from forward into backward, experiencing the disorientation of having their brain's orientation reversed relative to the world around them, struggling to operate in a backward space with a forward consciousness until they can escape back to their native orientation, forever changed by brief exposure to reality's other direction. Story 8. The Truck That Leaked Memories. Samuel Park's truck began leaking memories. Not his memories, but the collective memories of everyone who'd ever driven it. The 32-year-old from Washington purchased a used truck with 950,000 miles in March 2021 and immediately began experiencing memories that weren't his own, recollections bleeding into his consciousness from previous drivers who'd logged those 950,000 miles. Samuel would be driving and suddenly remember being someone else, a woman named Christine driving to see her dying mother. The grief and anxiety vivid and immediate, or a man named Robert hauling his first load as an owner-operator, the mixture of excitement and terror perfectly preserved. Or a person whose name Samuel didn't catch driving through a snowstorm in Montana, the white-knuckle fear of nearly losing control on an icy curve. The leaked memories were complete, not just visual impressions but full sensory experiences with emotions, thoughts, even physical sensations. Samuel felt Robert's nervousness as he signed paperwork, felt Christine's heartbreak as she learned her mother had died before she arrived, felt the unnamed driver's panic as their truck slid sideways on ice. The memories invaded Samuel's consciousness randomly, triggered by locations, weather, times of day. Anything that matched the conditions when those memories had been formed. Samuel researched the truck's history and found records showing it had been owned by 7 different drivers over its 18-year existence. Samuel was experiencing the accumulated memories of all 7 drivers, their experiences somehow imprinted on the truck itself, recorded in the metal and circuits through mechanisms Samuel didn't understand. The memory leakage intensified as Samuel drove more miles. He experienced entire days from previous drivers' lives, Christine's funeral for her mother, Robert's first successful delivery, another driver's divorce playing out over a series of phone conversations in the cab. Samuel's own memories began to blur with the leaked memories, creating confusion about what experiences were actually his versus what he was receiving from the truck. Samuel tried to document the leaked memories to separate them from his own recollections. He made lists. My memories growing up in Seattle, attending community college, working warehouse jobs before trucking. Leaked memories. Christine's mother dying, not my experience. Robert's loan signing, not my experience. Unnamed driver's snowstorm, not my experience. But the distinctions became harder to maintain as the leaked memories accumulated, each one adding to the confused pile of recollections that Samuel carried. The worst was when Samuel experienced traumatic memories. One previous driver had been in a serious accident, and Samuel experienced the crash in full detail, the moment of impact, the pain of injuries, the terror of being trapped in the wreckage waiting for rescue. Samuel found himself with trauma symptoms from an accident he'd never actually been in, his brain unable to distinguish between real trauma and trauma inherited through leaked memories. Another driver had struggled with addiction, and Samuel experienced the memories of using drugs in the truck, the desperate need for substances, the shame of hiding addiction from family. Samuel had never used drugs, but the memories were powerful enough that he felt cravings, felt the addict's psychological patterns, as if the leaked memories came with the neural pathways that had supported the original experiences. Samuel sought help from doctors and psychiatrists, but explaining that his truck was leaking previous drivers' memories into his brain sounded delusional. Medical professionals couldn't find neurological problems, couldn't identify mechanisms by which a vehicle could transmit memories to a human mind. They diagnosed Samuel with stress-induced false memory syndrome, prescribed anti-anxiety medication, and suggested he take time off from driving. But Samuel knew the memories were real. They contained information he couldn't have known, details about previous drivers' lives that Samuel verified by researching public records. Christine had indeed lost her mother in the time frame Samuel remembered. Robert had indeed purchased this truck as his first owner-operator vehicle. The unnamed snowstorm driver had indeed crashed on ice in Montana, exactly as Samuel's leaked memory depicted. The truck was a memory recording device, somehow capturing and preserving the experiences of everyone who drove it. And Samuel, by driving the same truck, was accessing those recordings, experiencing them as if they were his own memories, unable to distinguish between what he'd lived and what he was receiving from the vehicle's accumulated history. Samuel sold the truck after 6 months, unable to handle the memory contamination. But the leaked memories didn't stop when he changed vehicles. They were permanently integrated into Samuel's brain now, mixed with his own memories, creating a hybrid consciousness that contained experiences from 7 different people across 18 years. Samuel could no longer maintain a coherent sense of self, his identity fractured across multiple lifetimes, his mind a repository of other people's experiences that he'd inherited through a truck that recorded and leaked memories like a machine that had learned to remember everything it carried and then shared those memories with whoever came next, turning Samuel into a living archive of trucker experiences, a consciousness that contained multiple lives, a person who could no longer answer, "Who am I?" with a singular identity because he was Samuel and Christine and Robert and 5 others, all of them sharing the same brain, all of their memories equally real and equally his. creating a confused mosaic of experiences that could never be sorted into a single coherent narrative of a single person's life. Story 9. The Delivery to Yesterday. Franklin Torres received a delivery order in November 2020 to transport cargo from Los Angeles to San Francisco with a delivery deadline that was in the past. The 41-year-old driver checked his paperwork 3 times, convinced it was an error. But the delivery deadline clearly stated, must deliver by November 12, 2020, 2 p.m. The current date was November 13, 2020, 3:30 p.m. The deadline had expired over 24 hours ago. Franklin called his dispatcher, expecting to have the paperwork corrected. The delivery deadline is yesterday. I think there's a typo. No typo, the dispatcher replied. The client specifically requested delivery by November 12th, 2 p.m. You'll need to make the deadline. But it's already November 13th. The deadline is passed. Not for this delivery, this is a temporal shipment. You'll be driving backward through time to meet yesterday's deadline. The cargo is specially prepared for reverse temporal transport. Just drive the route as instructed and you'll arrive yesterday. Franklin thought it was an elaborate prank, but the pay was triple normal rates and the contract looked legitimate. He loaded the cargo, sealed containers with no indication of contents, and began driving north from Los Angeles toward San Francisco, following the specific route provided in his instructions. The route was strange, taking Franklin through remote areas rather than the direct highway route he'd normally use. The instructions specified exact roads, turns, speeds, almost like a ritualistic procedure that had to be followed precisely. Franklin obeyed the instructions, curious whether anything unusual would happen. Around midnight, somewhere on a remote mountain road, Franklin noticed the night sky was changing. The stars were moving backward, constellations rotating in reverse. The moon was traveling east to west instead of west to east. Franklin checked his phone. The time was moving backward, minutes decreasing rather than increasing. 11:47 p.m., 11:46 p.m., 11:45 p.m. Franklin was traveling backward through time, driving into yesterday while the rest of the world moved forward into tomorrow. His truck had become a temporal vehicle, somehow moving against time's current, carrying its cargo and driver into the past. Franklin continued driving as time reversed around him. He saw sunrise in the west as the earth rotated backward. He passed other vehicles traveling forward through time, from Franklin's reversed perspective appearing to drive backward at tremendous speeds. The normal world and Franklin's temporal vehicle were moving in opposite directions through time, creating the illusion of mutual high-speed motion. By the time Franklin reached San Francisco, his phone showed November 12th, 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the delivery deadline. He'd driven backward through time for approximately 30 hours of subjective experience, arriving yesterday despite having started today. Franklin delivered the cargo to a facility that seemed expecting him, the receiving staff unsurprised by temporal deliveries, signing paperwork that confirmed arrival at 1:47 p.m. on November 12th. Franklin tried to understand what he'd just done. He delivered cargo to the past, creating a grandfather paradox. The cargo had been loaded on November 13th but delivered on November 12th, existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. The facility staff explained briefly. Temporal logistics. We needed these components yesterday, but they weren't manufactured until today. You transported them backward through time, so they arrived when needed. It's expensive and complicated, but sometimes unavoidable. What's in the containers? Franklin asked. Medical supplies. Someone needed them yesterday to survive a medical emergency. Without your temporal delivery, they would have died waiting for supplies that wouldn't be manufactured until today. You saved a life by delivering cargo to the past. Franklin drove back to Los Angeles through normal time, forward at normal temporal rates, arriving on November 13th in the evening, nearly 24 hours after he'd started the delivery despite having driven only 12 hours total, and having already delivered cargo to November 12th. The temporal mechanics gave Franklin a headache when he tried to think about it clearly. Franklin received more temporal delivery orders over the following months, always transporting cargo backward through time to meet yesterday's deadlines. He became one of a small group of temporal logistics drivers, moving supplies into the past for clients willing to pay premium rates for backward time delivery. Franklin learned the routes that allowed temporal reversal, learned the speed and direction combinations that created the conditions for moving against time's current, learned to navigate by stars rotating backward rather than forward. But temporal deliveries had costs. Each trip backward through time created small changes in Franklin's personal timeline. He'd remember events differently after returning, find that his past had been slightly altered by his interference with yesterday. Franklin's timeline was being rewritten incrementally with each temporal delivery, creating a version of Franklin whose past included multiple temporal loops, multiple instances of the same days experienced in different orders. Franklin eventually quit temporal logistics, unable to maintain a stable sense of personal history when his past was constantly being revised by his own time-traveling deliveries. He delivered cargo to yesterday hundreds of times, creating hundreds of alternate versions of those yesterdays. And Franklin's memories were a confused mixture of all those versions, unable to settle on a single coherent past. Franklin lives in a retirement home now, unable to work, unable to maintain relationships, his personal timeline so fractured by temporal deliveries that he can no longer distinguish between what happened once, what happened multiple times in different versions, and what never happened but exists in his memory because some version of Franklin in some temporal loop experienced it. The delivery to yesterday, and all the subsequent deliveries to all the previous yesterdays, created a Franklin whose past is multiply-defined, existing in superposition, a life story that cannot be told linearly because it loops back on itself, creating a tangled temporal knot that makes Franklin's existence in the present uncertain and his memories of the past unreliable, a consciousness that exists across multiple temporal states simultaneously. Unable to experience time normally ever again because he spent too many hours driving backward through it, delivering cargo to yesterday while everyone else moved forward into tomorrow. Story 10. The Hitchhiker Who Aged with Distance. Gloria Mendez picked up a hitchhiker on Highway 40 in Arizona in May 2022 who aged visibly with every mile traveled. The 35-year-old driver saw the young man standing on the roadside with his thumb out and against her usual better judgment stopped to offer a ride. He appeared to be in his early 20s, dressed casually with a friendly smile. "Thanks for stopping," he said, climbing into Gloria's passenger seat. "I'm heading to Albuquerque. How far are you going?" "Albuquerque works for me," Gloria replied. "That's about 5 hours. Make yourself comfortable." They drove in pleasant conversation for the first 30 minutes. The hitchhiker, who introduced himself as Marcus, was articulate and knowledgeable, discussing music, politics, philosophy. But as they approached the 1-hour mark, Gloria noticed something disturbing. Marcus looked older. His face had developed lines that hadn't been there before. His hair had gray streaks. His hands showed age spots. "Are you feeling all right?" Gloria asked. "You look tired." Marcus glanced at his reflection in the side mirror and grimaced. "It's happening again. I age when I travel. The further I go from my starting point, the older I become. By the time we reach Albuquerque, I'll probably look 60 or 70. That's impossible. Watch me for the next hour. You'll see it's very possible." Gloria did watch, and she did see. Over the following hour, Marcus aged visibly, continuously, his youth draining away mile by mile. His skin sagged, his posture stooped, his voice became raspy. By the 2-hour mark, Marcus looked 50 years old. By 3 hours, he looked 70. By 4 hours, he looked ancient, his body frail and withered, his movements slow and painful. "Why is this happening to you?" Gloria asked, horrified by the accelerated aging. "I don't know," Marcus wheezed, his voice now barely audible. "It started a year ago. I age approximately 1 year per 15 miles traveled. I can't travel more than about 300 miles from my starting point before I die of old age. I've been trying to find help, trying to understand what's wrong with me, but every journey brings me closer to death. Hitchhiking is the only way I can travel. If I drive myself, I age too fast to maintain control of the vehicle." Gloria felt terrible for Marcus, but also frightened. What if his condition was contagious? What if proximity to him caused Gloria to age as well? She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked normal, no signs of accelerated aging. The condition seemed to affect only Marcus, aging him relative to distance from his origin point while leaving others unaffected. As they approached Albuquerque, Marcus was barely alive, his body approaching the extreme limits of human lifespan. He looked like he was 100 years old, his breathing labored, his eyes cloudy, his body failing. Gloria drove faster, desperate to reach Albuquerque before Marcus died in her passenger seat. They reached the Albuquerque city limits, and Gloria pulled into the first gas station. "We're here. Where do you need to go?" Marcus could barely speak. "Hospital, research, studying my condition." Gloria drove Marcus to the nearest hospital and helped him inside, a process that took 10 minutes because Marcus could barely walk, his ancient body too frail to support itself. Gloria explained to emergency staff that Marcus needed help, that he'd aged dramatically during their 5-hour drive, that he needed researchers studying his condition. The medical staff seemed familiar with Marcus, as if he'd been there before. They took him to a specialized unit without asking many questions, leaving Gloria in the waiting area. A doctor eventually came out to talk to Gloria. "Marcus has a unique condition we've been studying for the past year. He ages proportionally to distance from his birth location. We've determined his birth location is a small town about 180 miles west of here. If he stays within that 180-mile radius, his aging progresses normally. But for every mile he travels beyond that radius, he ages an additional year. He's made several attempts to travel to larger medical centers for more advanced study, but the aging always becomes life-threatening before he can reach them." "Why does distance cause aging?" Gloria asked. "We don't know. Our theory is that he's somehow still connected to his birth location through quantum entanglement or some unknown physical principle. Moving away from that location stretches the connection, and the stress manifests as accelerated aging. It's as if his body wants to remain at his birth location, and traveling away from it costs him life itself." "What happens now?" "We'll treat Marcus's aging-related damage as best we can, then send him back toward his birth location. As he travels back, he'll age in reverse, growing younger with each mile that reduces his distance from origin. By the time he reaches his hometown, he'll be 22 again, his usual age. But he'll be trapped there forever, unable to travel more than a few dozen miles without risking death from accelerated aging." Gloria left the hospital, disturbed by Marcus's condition and its implications. If one person could be bound to their birth location by aging distance correlation, could others have similar conditions they weren't aware of? Gloria thought about her own life, her travels across the country. Did she age faster when far from Seattle, where she'd been born? Had all her years of trucking aged her prematurely because she was constantly hundreds or thousands of miles from her origin point? Gloria became obsessed with measuring her own aging relative to distance. She took photos of herself at various distances from Seattle, looking for signs of accelerated aging when far from home. She couldn't detect any obvious correlation, but what if the effect was subtle, adding months or years to her appearance gradually, unnoticeably? Gloria eventually returned to the Pacific Northwest, taking regional routes that kept her within 500 miles of Seattle, unwilling to risk traveling further in case she had a mild version of Marcus's condition. Better to be cautious, to stay relatively close to home, than to discover too late that distance from origin was costing her years of life, aging her prematurely, binding her to her birth location through invisible threads that exacted a toll measured in wrinkles and gray hair, and the accumulated damage of years compressed into miles, every journey stealing time from her future, every trip away from home bringing her closer to the death that awaited all travelers who strayed too far from where they began, who defied the mysterious force that wanted to keep them anchored to their origins, who paid the price of exploration with the currency of lifespan itself.